November. And we walked down the main street, which is a muddy rut bordered with tents of all kinds. A circus tent, some pop tents, a few teepees, a large army tent, and several tents with white picket fences and flower pots around them, and lots of small kennels filled with pit bull puppies, growling and snapping. And we could hear the sound of a generator buzzing somewhere and wood being chopped. And there were huge wood piles everywhere you looked, and lots of smoke stinging your eyes. And I was thinking, you know, it would probably have been more realistic to have come on a day when it was really cold and dreary. The kind of New Jersey cold that can shrink your face and make living in the woods a real nightmare. But the weather was warm that day, and camping really didn't seem that bad at all. Now, there were a lot of people sitting around on logs or folding chairs in front of their tents, and we waved to a few, kind of self-conscious, "Hey, how's it going?" But, you know, most of them ignored us or seemed just too exhausted to even look up. Then suddenly, a woman sprinted out of a clearing in the trees, and she said, "Hello, I'm Jessie, and if you like, I can show you around in case you want to meet anyone here at all or see our watering system with chickens or..." And then, in the middle of the sentence, she just stopped talking and looked down at the ground and said, "Yes, the chickens and I don't know, or why." And then she started to sob. And I'm looking around, and there were a lot of chickens everywhere, sort of running around in the bushes. And I was trying to see if there's something wrong with the chickens that might be making her cry. But they seemed like regular chickens, maybe a little feral, if you could say that about chickens, sort of running in weird circles and then dashing off into the underbrush erratically. And a couple of more minutes went by, and she's still crying and trying to stop. And she said, I'm so sorry. I just get so emotional. It's not the chickens. If only I could." And then she went back to crying. This time the crying lasted even longer, and I just spent the time kind of looking around at all the little tattered brown leaves still waving around up in the winter branches. A few minutes later, she stopped crying, and she told me she was the town social worker, and she was there to take care of people and help them adjust to their new life in the woods. And she'd been living there for 5 years, since the beginning of the town, and sometimes she said she just got to thinking about how horrible it would be to be there all the time. But since she was there all the time, it sounded like kind of a weird thing to say. And then she started to cry again. And then she said, okay, like this tour, this is the tour, so let's go and meet Marilyn. You should meet Marilyn, and you should meet John. They're really great townspeople. You'll really like them. And she led the way through the woods to a clearing filled with pots and pans and chickens and rusting plows and pumps and old car parts. Then Marilyn came running out of her tent, and she said, "Hello, hi, how are you? How have you been?" And as if we were old friends. And Marilyn was like someone we knew from down the road, except that most of her teeth were missing, and her hands were strange, shiny, polished black that looked like the kind of hands medieval people or cave people might have had. "Now, I'm sorry you can't meet John right now, because John's out for the moment," she said, and it was hard to imagine what out meant in the woods, where everyone was pretty much out all the time. But in any case, she was keeping up the formalities, and she said, "But please, come and see the new birdhouses were making for the Christmas fair. So we went over to the pup tent she was using as her workshop. And it was crammed with old shingles and glue and rusty tools and all the things she used to make the birdhouses. And the houses looked like miniature Lakewood houses, but Hansel and Gretel style. And Marilyn said she hoped they would sell really well at the upcoming Christmas fair because where the tent town people sold the craft projects that they made to the people who still lived in the town. Then Jessie, the social worker who was in the pup tent too, started to cry again. And I began to realize that this was not a hard bureaucrat. And during the rest of the tour, she cried as she showed people around, and she cried as she introduced people. And gradually I noticed that most of the people who lived there seemed more or less to be used to her constant breakdowns, and that they were all taking care of her, protecting her, sometimes teasing her. You can't chop wood, you're too emotional, you'll cut your leg off. And suddenly I realized she was not a social worker at all, but someone who wished she was a social worker, saw herself as a social worker, and that no one was in charge there at all. Now the other side of the camp was much more chaotic, and garbage was strewn around everywhere, and people are yelling in their tents, and all these arguments going on. The chickens lived in the tents too at night, but more and more often they were spending their nights up in the trees as they began adapting to the woods. Now, I'd never seen chickens fly, but hey, who knew chickens can fly? They sort of flap their wings up to the upper branches and they sit up there like they're impersonating owls or blackbirds, and it's really strange. They're like some newly evolved species of tree-dwelling chickens. And Marilyn said, "Aren't those chickens just so lovely up there? And what a beautiful day. Well, thank you so much for coming. It's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you, and I'm sorry you missed John. Maybe next time. I know he'd enjoy meeting you, and I'm sure he'll look forward to it a lot." And we said, "Yes, okay then. Thanks. Next time. See you. See you next time." Now, like some of the people with advanced Alzheimer's, it's odd how they can still seem to function on a certain social level, how they still have some of that social glue. Have a nice day, they say, and their minds are almost gone, ripped apart, and they have no idea who you are. And you know, you hope at the end of your life there would be like a few flashes of wisdom or bravery or wonder, but instead, what seems to be left for them are the small pleasantries left from a lifetime of politeness. Have a nice day, they say, and are really